Most of the news you hear today about homelessness in Connecticut is that the numbers are heading in the right direction. That is due in part to the hard work of our towns and partners like the Columbus House. Joining us today is Margaret Middleton, the new CEO of Columbus House, to talk to us about the successes and the work that still need to be done in ending homelessness in Connecticut. We'd like to thank our premier sponsor at Digital Back Office, Palo Alto Networks. Check them out at digitalbackoffice.com or paloaltonetworks.com, as well as our sponsors at Gateway and Housatonic Community Colleges. The Municipal Voice is the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities podcast in collaboration with WNHH LP 103.5 FM. I'm your host, Matt Ford. As always, be sure to give us a like and let us know what you're thinking in the comments. CCM's Municipal Voice podcast continues to present a key forum on important state-local issues. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the consensus views of CCM or our member municipal leaders. Margaret, thanks for being with us today.
Pleasure to be here, Matt. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, first of all, congratulations. You became the CEO of Columbus House just in May of this year. Can you talk to us a little bit about your background and what Columbus House does?
Sure. So I'll start with Columbus House. Columbus House is probably the largest homeless service provider in the greater New Haven area. People in your podcast may or may not know that we're also serve a lot of people in the Middlesex County area, particularly in Middletown. So people often think of Columbus House as an emergency shelter, and we do have an emergency shelter. We have about 82 beds in New Haven. But actually, we support over 300 people who are in units of housing. And we also do a small bit of affordable housing development. So we've developed around 70 units of affordable housing between New Haven and Middlesex counties.
So I know you were...
So we do it all, Matt.
You do it all. I know prior to this you were in Georgia, and so this was kind of a big move to come take this over. What drew you to an organization like Columbus House?
Well, this was actually homecoming for me. So Prior to this, I was the co-founder of an organization called the Connecticut Veterans Legal Center, and that represents military veterans recovering from homelessness and serious mental illness. So during that time, I also served on the board of Columbus House, and that's how I learned so much about housing. And I was very fortunate because I worked at the CVLC during the real push to end veterans homelessness in Connecticut, which was an amazing, amazing thing to be a part of and to watch and to see how it worked. So that was really my introduction to the importance of housing, and housing being like the essential sort of building block of a healthy and fulfilling life. And I did take a job for 2 years teaching at the law school at Georgia State University. I'm from Georgia, so it's not quite as big a stretch as it sounds, which was a terrific thing to do. And then when this opportunity came up, I was really, really super happy to move back to Connecticut and work for this organization that I have loved for a long time.
Even in 2020, it was an exciting thing to try.
Well, I'll tell you, Matt, I interviewed for this job February 14th. So it was right there on the cusp. I think I accepted this job like right before the lockdown started. It definitely became a different job.
Definitely. So from reports that came out very early in 2020, kind of before a lot of stuff started happening, it seemed as if homelessness is kind of trending downward in Connecticut, which is a positive sign that we're doing something right. But a lot of people might be wondering, how do we know that? How do we know about the successes? Can you talk about maybe the point in time sort of count and why it's important that we have accurate figures when we're talking about homelessness in the state?
Yeah, so the homeless service providers are actually a really networked and data-driven group. And we have something called, there's two things. One is HMIS, which is the Homelessness Management Information System. I'm going to call it that. I'm not sure what the acronym is for. But all of the providers in the state enter data into the same database. So that gives us as a state somewhat of a sense of sort of like who's in a shelter bed where. And then we also do this thing that you mentioned called the point in time count. This is actually something they do across the country where we try to pick a night in January, so it'll be very, very cold, because they want to count, they want to get the best they can moment of time snapshot of how many people are homeless. And on a cold night, the very most possible number of people will actually be inside shelters. And so that makes the counting the most accurate. And then on that night, volunteers will fan out all over the state to literally go to underpasses, to go to bus stops, to go to any place where people still might be outside, and talk to people, engage with them, understand if they're experiencing homelessness, add them to the count, and also, of course, offer them resources and assistance. So that's how we have, that's how we try to gauge sort of where we are at the moment.
So according to the 2019 count, there were just over 3,000 people experiencing homelessness in Connecticut, down from a high of 4,600 in 2008. Things have gotten better. Have things gotten better, or is this kind of just a result of proactive measures taken by towns and organizations like Columbus House?
I mean, I think that the numbers are improving. I mean, this has been a many decades long effort by people who are not me, right? Like, I'm new to this job. My predecessor, Allison Cunningham, and others have been doing this very organized and very strategically minded effort to eliminate homelessness in our state. So our efforts are very targeted. We're really careful about how we spend resources and how we direct them. So I think you can assume that the numbers, that any numbers showing improvement are real and genuine numbers. And part of that would also reflect the incredible success of the state of Connecticut in ending veteran homelessness. They reached functional zero in veteran homelessness. And so that would be reflected in those numbers.
I guess one thing is I'm curious about is we talk about, the Connecticut count going down and stuff. How does that compare to the sort of national numbers? Are they also going down as trend, or is Connecticut standing out a little bit in that?
That's a great question, and I don't know the answer. I'm too new to homeless services to have like my fingertips on all of those kinds of statistics. I can tell you that I lived for a number of years in Los Angeles, and that homelessness definitely varies very dramatically geographically. Coming from Atlanta has a really visible and significant problem with unsheltered homelessness, people experiencing homelessness. So I would say in Connecticut, we're definitely among the more fortunate in terms of having a really awesome network of service providers, really great partnerships with cities and towns, and also great partners at the state.
Yeah, because I know you mentioned you had the system where you can all in Connecticut kind of put your information in one kind of central database to kind of keep track of that. Is there like a national equivalent that you know of, or?
So that's actually a requirement by HUD, and every state has that. I think that Connecticut is rare in that all of the regions use the same one. I know that in other states, it's like they may have different of these databases across the state. It's cool that Connecticut is all in one, and it has to do with our size. The other thing that's been a big push in the last decade that people should know about is called the Coordinated Access Network. Are you familiar with that, Matt?
No, I don't think I am.
So this is like the idea that you call 211 and there are, rather than sort of showing up at the shelter at 4 p.m. and getting in a line and hoping you get a bed, which is what you used to have to do, that you can sort of call 211 and know that there's a bed for you in a particular place, because they know where all the beds are, and they know where people can go. And so this has really improved bed utilization. So there's never an empty bed, right? Because we always know where the beds are and who can go. And it also helps with that data collection that you were talking about before. Like, it helps with our understanding of like how many people are waiting, how many people are seeking shelter, how many people are in unstable housing situations.
That's really interesting. It's nice to see kind of some technology assisting in your efforts and making, it more efficient, it sounds like.
Yeah, that's the idea. I mean, the CAN is very heavily dependent on people. For example, our outreach and engagement teams are really essential for actually getting out into the world and talking to people who are experiencing homelessness and getting them to be part of that system, and actually getting them to, sign up to be part of the Coordinated Access Network. So it doesn't happen without a huge amount of investment in staff time and, open-hearted, loving human engagement, for sure. Like, it's not a sort of automated process, but it is a step in the right direction in terms of actually ending homelessness.
Yeah, it sounds like, you still have to do all that on the ground sort of work, but it helps you then utilize the information and knowledge you get from that thing more effectively and share it with others that are trying, working towards the same goals.
Exactly.
So in a recent thing I was reading in the Connecticut Mirror related to high need populations, there was a couple of figures that there was about 600 children experiencing homelessness in some form, and almost 1/5 of the population, there was almost 1/5 of the population as children, and almost 200 still veterans experiencing homelessness, but most of those were sheltered. Can you talk about the 2016 effort by then Governor Malloy, and you were a part of this, to end chronic veteran homelessness, which led to the figures that we just mentioned, that those 200 that we still have are mostly sheltered?
Sure. I love to talk about that, Matt, because to me, it's an example of the idea that as a community, when we put our will and our government effort behind an idea, we are totally capable of actually solving problems. I think a lot of people think of homelessness as being this like intractable thing, and that it's sort of inherently an individual problem, that people have mental illness or they have substance abuse problems. And the effort to end veteran homelessness really shows that, like, nope, it's really about resources, coordination, and the will to solve the problem. And the VA was really a very essential part of that. The secretary of the VA at that time put a huge priority on veteran homelessness. And the federal government just put a ton of money into what are called vouchers. If you're familiar with vouchers, Matt, these are essentially rental assistance that people can take to rent an apartment, the veterans can take to rent an apartment. And we have an awesome federal delegation, as you know, and Connecticut was really, really smart and coordinated in the way it used those vouchers to get chronically homeless veterans housed, to get female veterans housed, and to get veterans of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan housed. And so by doing that, they reached what this thing called functional zero, which is a sort of technical definition. I think there's only one other state that was sort of honored in that way, and recognized for having achieved that. So it's really something to be proud of. And I think we should all just like hold on to it as an example of like, we actually know how to do this. We totally know how to do this. We could end homelessness for everyone, for sure. We definitely could do it. We just have to have the political will. Honestly, we have to put our resources into it, and we have to care about housing.
So it's not insurmountable. It's not just that's the way it's always been and always has to be. There are answers. And it sounds like also from what you said that a lot of what Connecticut did, those resources from the federal government were available to everybody. And what Connecticut did was figure out how to utilize them better in a lot of ways. Was
well,
the crux of a lot of that success?
I mean, part of it is that Connecticut has a small enough homeless population that through really, really awesome outreach and engagement efforts on the part of the homeless services provider community and also the VA, they were really able to get a handle on how many homeless veterans are there, where are they, and really do targeted outreach and engagement work to get people housed. So it's really, it has to do also with the fact that Connecticut is both small and very capable. Like, it's just full of awesome, hardworking organizations that really put a premium on working together.
But the small size helps out some.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's right. I mean, when I was in Los Angeles, I think on any given night, there were like 4,000 homeless veterans in the city of Los Angeles alone, or maybe it was in the county of maybe it was in Los Angeles County, but either way, that was probably 4 times the number that Connecticut had on a bad night, So the scope of the problem
are operating on a different scale than we are.
Absolutely. Sure. And let's use that to our advantage and be the first state to end all homelessness, because we actually can do it. I don't think there's any question that I'm sure lessons learned from Connecticut have permeated broadly, and that's still happening. During the pandemic, Columbus House in particular was really focused on getting people housed. So we helped over 300 people get into permanent housing since the pandemic started, which is a really huge number. And one of the things that we did to really push that was to sort of innovate what's called a shared housing model, which is helping people move into places with roommates. It's funny to me because it's an innovation that I also practiced during my entire 20s. But it is a cost-saving measure, right? It's an important tool that people use. And for homeless service providers, we really had to work out a model of like, how are we going to identify people who are going to make good roommates, where the resources line up, where the lifestyle lines up, that these will be successful arrangements. So I'm really proud that we're still sort of, pushing the envelope of what's possible to get people housed.
Yeah, speaking of, you mentioned COVID a little bit, and obviously with everything this year, COVID has kind of changed the game in some ways. And I think one thing that surprised some people was how some organizations used hotels to temporarily house people experiencing homelessness. You started at Columbus House this time after those efforts had begun, but can you talk about how some of those programs have succeeded and how partnerships between towns and organizations kind of help move hundreds of people almost overnight?
I think that this is one of the huge success stories of the coronavirus period. Like one of the things that we'll look back on and be like, wow, like COVID came and these communities got together and did this amazing thing. So I know at Columbus House, everyone was moved out of the shelter by, I think, the first week in April without a single COVID transmission. And that was really done thanks to the help of the city of New Haven and the state, both of whom were like, yep, let's do this. We have to get people safe and we have to keep them safe. And I think it's just a huge testament to the commitment on the part of government at all levels in the state of Connecticut towards people's health and safety. We really, really saw it in terms of getting people into these hotels. So we actually had people staying in hotels, clients of ours staying in hotels through the summer. We never fully had anyone come out of the hotels. And now going into the winter, actually all of our operations are going to be in non-congregate settings. So everybody's going to be either in a hotel room, maybe in an apartment if we can manage that. But we will have very, very few congregate settings across the entire state. Almost everybody is going to be in a more socially distanced, safer space than that. And I really want to recognize the state of Connecticut for that and the state government Department of Housing, because in other states, they are not doing that. They did not figure out how to
you might still have the shelter with the sea of beds and cots that seem like a prime place for COVID to spread.
Absolutely. And we have shelters that are open. Columbus House did move everyone out of the shelter last week, but there are shelters that are still open, and those shelters have been very successful. They've had few transmissions. They haven't had a lot of positive cases among staff. But the fact that we have the option of using hotels is very much a testament to our state government and their commitment to using federal dollars in creative ways to get people into a safe environment, for which we are extremely grateful. I mean, running a congregate shelter is a really pretty stressful undertaking right now because the whole design of it is like not COVID safe.
The opposite of COVID safe, yeah.
It's kind of like what you would design if you wanted to spread COVID.
Yeah. So I guess it might seem like kind of a radical idea to some, but have any efforts in ending homelessness in the state include things like just straight up buying apartment blocks or old hotels and turning them into shelters? Is there a future for programs like that, or is it kind of cost prohibitive?
No, the state of Connecticut, the commissioner of the Department of Housing, set aside a block of the COVID CARES Act money that the state received for the purpose of trying to buy distressed hotels to make people safer during the pandemic. I'm not sure where those efforts are at the moment. We have definitely tried to take advantage of that to the extent we can in Columbus House's service area. But yeah, so that has been a push and an idea, especially in places where hotels have really been struggling.
Yeah.
We haven't, honestly, I don't think we've seen that as much in Greater New Haven. I can't speak for the rest of the state, but we don't have a ton of hotels. Like we're not New York City or Boston where we're like a big tourist destination. And so there's just like big, gigantic hotels everywhere that are now like, what are we going to do? That hasn't really been the case.
You are listening to the Municipal Voice on WNHH 103.5 FM. Still on kind of COVID and stuff, but there was an uptick in homelessness in 2008 and again 2018, both of which kind of tied back to things like the financial collapse in 08. And then later, kind of Hurricane Maria, there was a lot of people fleeing the situation in Puerto Rico that came to Connecticut. There's a good kind of population here. Kind of both saw little upticks in Connecticut's populations. Are you expecting an uptick coming because of COVID and people getting evicted and stuff like that?
I think that the answer is yes. I mean, I say this with some amount of caution because I think no one knows what's going to happen with the eviction moratorium. The homeless service providers and the legal aid community both really have their eyes on when these eviction moratorium, when the federal eviction moratorium ends, what the state will do is unclear. Whether there's going to be another relief act, whether a new administration means there's going to be a different approach to the eviction moratorium, we just don't know. If the eviction moratorium goes through and ends in January as is currently planned, we're definitely concerned about the potential for people to become homeless. The state has a number of eviction prevention actions right now. One is a sort of like big pot of money that you probably read about in the paper. There's also a second and smaller program that's specifically focused towards people who are at high risk of becoming homeless through eviction. So there definitely is a lot of focus being paid to that, but we're definitely concerned about the possibility that there'll be sort of a wave of new homeless people.
Yeah, are there being like contingency plans being worked on right now by people, like if that does happen, if you do see this wave, kind of so you're ready for it?
That's such an interesting question. I mean, I think if we had the capacity to add the tons and tons of beds that we might need in the event that there was this wave, we would probably just do that now because it's actually very, very hard right now for us to come up with safe beds for people because of the ventilation issues. So you need like either gigantic spaces like gymnasiums where there's like tons of air circulation and people can really spread out, or you need hotels, right, where you can have like a person or two in a space that's fairly confined and they can kind of shelter in place. So I think, if there is a wave of folks, we'll be pulling on the same sort of ingenuity and resources that we are right now to be like, okay, how do we come up with another 100 spaces? How do we come up with another 100 beds? And this is a group of providers that absolutely never stops thinking that way and never stops sort of like rushing in to imagine and fix problems. So yeah. There's going to be like hours spent in meetings, throwing out possibilities, thinking through what'll happen. But I do think that'll be it's going to be really contingent on what happens when these moratoriums end.
Yeah. We've talked, about the federal government stuff and the state, but obviously at CCM, where the municipal leaders of Connecticut are a membership, what can local municipal leaders do to help in these efforts, and also to prepare, maybe?
Right. Well, municipal partners are really, really, really essential, Matt, to what we do. It's funny. I think they would say that we're really essential to what they do because municipalities are really the chief partners that we have for our cold weather efforts. This year, there's some additional funding through the state because of CARES Act that's supporting these cold weather efforts and supporting the hoteling. But traditionally, cities are sort of the frontline providers, not the providers, but they're the really out in front in terms of funding and standing up warming centers, which are sort of places where people can literally come in and get warm, which is what they sound like. Yeah. And at least in New Haven, we have what we call an overflow shelter. So basically our capacity basically doubles during cold weather, and we can accommodate almost twice as many people thanks to the city of New Haven. They're the primary funder of that. So you can't, there is no homeless service provision in the state of Connecticut without the municipalities.
Yeah. And we talked about, the cities helping a lot with that, but is in Connecticut homelessness mostly an urban problem, or do our smaller towns also have issues surrounding this?
Oh, it is definitely everywhere. Columbus House merged several years ago, maybe 5 or 7 years ago, with the Wallingford emergency shelter. So Wallingford is not a big city. It's a pretty middle class place, and it's actually really heartwarming. This was an entirely volunteer run effort on the part of the people of Wallingford to provide housing for people in their community experiencing homelessness. So yeah, there's homelessness everywhere in the state of Connecticut. In the bigger urban areas, we just have bigger numbers, so there's more visibility, but it's definitely a problem everywhere.
Yeah. Um, so more specifically with you, you're in your new position there. What do you see as the future of Columbus House? If the figures, you know, keep dropping, in 10 years they went from 4,500 to 3,000. Could we see that number, at what I believe they call it functional zero or whatever before in 20
Reaching
years?
functional zero, right?
Yeah. Is that something that you see happening?
You know, that's absolutely what I would love to see, Matt. We've been talking about the fact that we're coming up on Columbus House's 40th anniversary. And
Hmm.
what I would love to see is that in 40 years, Columbus House doesn't exist in the form that it exists right now, right? Like we're an entity that would love to go out of business. We would love to
Yeah.
not be in the business of providing emergency shelter for folks. When I talk about functional zero, it really it's the idea that people will become homeless or their housing will be unstable and they will lose
Hmm.
stable housing, but that their experience of homelessness will be brief, that they'll be identified and supported, and avoid homelessness altogether, move
Yeah.
into another and more stable housing situation. So, yes, that's absolutely where we'd love to be in 20 years. And, I think that different people have different ideas about how we're going to get there. And what I would love your listeners to come away with, like what I would love for people working for municipalities everywhere, working for levels of government everywhere, is that housing absolutely has to be a priority. Like
Yeah.
of all the issues that we talk about that affect people on the day to day, there's very little that is more important to people than having a safe and affordable place to live. It's
Yeah.
just the bedrock. It is just the bedrock. And without it, people can't be healthy. People
Yeah.
can't be. They are employed. There are many homeless people who are employed, but it's very hard. It's much harder to be engaged, successfully in recovery or engaged successfully in mental health care. All of those things are improved when people have safe and affordable housing. And in Connecticut, we have a housing shortage. Period. Right? It's not
Hmm.
just that we have people experiencing homelessness. Like rents are exorbitant. There just
Yeah.
isn't enough housing, full stop. And so I think that's on all of the communities. I think a lot of the pressure gets put on big urban centers around
Hmm.
the lack of housing. But the reality is that everywhere, we just need more housing. And we
Yeah.
need our elected officials at different levels of government to really make that top of mind and make that a
Mm.
priority. It can't be, it's tough because it's big and expensive, but it
Yeah.
just can't be an afterthought. It can't be something we do like when we get to it.
Yeah. So is that where some of the regulations for like new constructions come in, where like a certain amount has to be affordable market rate housing and sort of those policies? Is that sort of how government can help steer towards more housing?
Yeah, I think you're seeing a big push towards affordable housing moving outside of the big urban areas and into, I call them big urban areas. I mean, we're not like a gigantic city in New Haven, but, there being affordable housing everywhere. And I think that that's incredibly important. And there's a lot of work being done. I don't know if you're familiar with the Open Communities Alliance, but Erin Boggs and her group, and they're working with folks at the Yale Law School, Anika Singh Lamar, around laws that are barriers to the development of affordable housing
Yeah.
in different communities. So I do think that I would love to see more housing, period, and more housing everywhere
Yeah.
as being a solution. And Columbus House's role in that is going to be to continue to add affordable units wherever we can and to continue to support people who are in affordable units so that they
Hmm.
can stay housed. Because what we know about housing people who've experienced homelessness is that if you provide them support when they're in that housing so that they can sort of build the routines of, more fulfilling and housed life, then
Yeah.
with that support, they can stay housed in ways that just sort of handing somebody the keys to an apartment may not work.
Yeah. I think, if I'm looking at the situation right now, if there's a silver lining to anything, do you think that the current kind of focus on getting people sheltered because of COVID and the realization that, their health and safety impacts the health and safety of the entire community? So like, if you help these people, you're helping everybody. Do you think there's some sort of future
Matt,
sense of that where that
preach.
realization can
Yes.
help people in the future kind of understand why this is important?
Yes, you are nailing it. You are nailing it, sir. That's what I've been saying. The secret, yeah, the silver lining has really been that people appreciate that homelessness isn't just an individual problem, it's a community problem, and that the health of one of us affects the health of all of us, right? And that keeping people, for example, in congregate housing is a public health problem. It's not just a problem for the people experiencing homelessness, it's really a problem for anybody who doesn't want to get a pandemic virus, right?
Yeah.
So I think you're absolutely right. And I think the other thing that I hope will happen, silver lining part two, is that people will recognize the very essential role that homeless service providers like Columbus House play in their community, that we're not just sort of like, we're not just a group of volunteers in a church basement is sort of what I've been saying the last few days. Like, we're a big professional organization. We're data driven. We're really focused on ending homelessness. Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping that the pandemic will help people and municipalities and different levels of government appreciate the professionalism that we bring to this work, and the fact that we're actually part of emergency response. We're not just housing providers. We're really part of the city's and the state's response to this emergency. So I do feel like one upshot, if you want to call it that, of this virus will be an increased appreciation of the need to end homelessness, and I hope additional resources directed towards doing that.
Well, let's all hope that.
Margaret, let's all hope that.
Yeah, right? Margaret, thanks so much for speaking with us today, and keep up the good
Total
work.
pleasure, Matt.
All right.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate that. Can I add one thing?
Yes, absolutely.
I just really want to give a shout out to, first of all, to anybody from Columbus House who actually watched this. That's amazing. But second of all, I just want to recognize the awesome, no, I mean the staff of Columbus House. I just want to recognize the staff of Columbus House because they are awesome. People keep saying to me, you joined a homeless service provider during a pandemic. Hasn't that been crazy? And I keep telling people, I'm like, I joined an awesome team during a pandemic, and it's been a total treat because Columbus House is just full of hardworking, compassionate, courageous, brilliant people who have shown up every single day of this pandemic to support our clients. So big shout out to the staff of Columbus House and how grateful I am for their work.
We'd like to thank our guest, Margaret Middleton. Thanks to our premier sponsors, Digital Back Office Palo Alto Networks, who you can check out at digitalbackoffice.com and paloaltonetworks.com, as well as our sponsors at Gateway and Housatonic Community Colleges. Learn more at gatewayct.edu and housatonic.edu. Municipal Voice is a co-production by CCM and WNHH, 103.5 FM. Kevin Maloney is our executive producer, Christopher Gilson is our producer, Harry Draws on the boards, and I'm Matt Ford, your host. Be sure to check out our Facebook page and give us a like, and watch out for our CCM chat series on our YouTube page.
Did you know race is America's top predictor of success? Schools are unequitable. COVID-19 has highlighted health disparities among Black and brown people. What can be done about these problems? CCM, Connecticut's Association of Towns and Cities, seeks to improve everyday life for every resident. CCM is staging a December 3rd program with national experts on race relations called Achieving Racial Equity. National experts discuss local opportunities. It features Wes Moore, renowned author of The Other Wes Moore, Betsy Hodges, humanitarian and former mayor of Minneapolis, author Tim Wise, and activist Bree Newsome. You are a key part of this conversation. Join this free event on December 3rd. Register at ccmcares.com.